Welcome back to QHSE Talks, your trusted hub for advancing professional knowledge in occupational health, safety, and environmental management, and your go-to channel for mastering the safety certifications from the Board of Certified Safety Professionals. Today, we're diving into a topic that sits at the core of professional safety practice and appears across several areas of the CSP blueprint: safety program auditing. Specifically, we're exploring Chapter 37, Safety Program Auditing Techniques and Checklist, a chapter that provides practical insight into how safety professionals evaluate whether a health and safety management system is truly effective. Because here's an uncomfortable truth every experienced safety professional eventually realizes. Almost every organization already has a safety program. They have written procedures, they have policies and manuals, they have training records and compliance documentation, they have inspection reports and performance metrics. On paper, everything often looks excellent. But the most important question in occupational safety is not whether a program exists. The real question is the program actually working in practice? Are employees following procedures the way they are written? Are supervisors reinforcing safe behaviors consistently? Are hazards being identified before incidents occur? And does leadership truly demonstrate commitment to safety, or is it simply written in policy statements? These are the questions that separate administrative compliance from true operational safety. And this is exactly where safety program auditing becomes one of the most powerful tools available to safety professionals. For those preparing for the CSP exam, this topic aligns directly with multiple blueprint areas, especially Domain 2, Management Systems, where safety professionals are expected to evaluate the effectiveness of safety programs, leadership engagement, and overall system performance. In that domain, the CSP blueprint expects candidates to understand how to assess EHS management and audit systems, leadership accountability and management commitment, program effectiveness and continuous improvement, incident investigation processes, and system evaluation. Auditing is the mechanism that ties all of those competencies together. A well-designed safety audit allows the professional to step back and evaluate the entire health and safety management system as a functioning structure. It helps determine whether the organization's policies, procedures, and expectations are actually being translated into real-world behaviors and safe operating conditions. In other words, auditing answers a fundamental question. Does the living, breathing reality of the workplace match what the safety program promises? Chapter 37 emphasizes that auditing is not just about checking boxes or identifying violations. It is a structured method for evaluating the health of the entire safety system, including leadership commitment, employee participation, hazard identification processes, training effectiveness, and control mechanisms. For CSP candidates, this chapter is especially valuable because it bridges the gap between management theory and operational practice. It explains how safety professionals use systematic tools such as document reviews, employee interviews, workplace observations, and structured checklists to measure how well a safety program is actually performing. But before we dive into the mechanics of safety program audits, we need to acknowledge something important about how audits are perceived in many workplaces. Because despite their importance in improving safety systems, the word audit often carries a negative connotation. In many organizations, when employees hear that an audit is coming, the reaction is immediate. Workers become cautious, supervisors become defensive, managers begin preparing explanations. Instead of being viewed as a learning opportunity, audits are often seen as something closer to an inspection designed to find faults. And that perception has influenced how safety programs and sometimes even safety professionals are received inside organizations. Because the reality is, that perception didn't appear out of nowhere. It developed over decades of how audits were implemented and experienced across the industry.
What's fascinating here is that historically, the industry has absolutely earned that stigma. For decades, Workers and even mid-level managers have viewed audits as this purely punitive exercise.
Like a corporate hall monitor.
Right. Someone just showing up to hand out demerits and ruin everyone's week. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, particularly Domain 2 of the CSP blueprint, which covers program management, the audit is not a weapon.
Right.
It's actually the ultimate diagnostic tool for organizational health. It is it's the only reliable mechanism that tells you if the living, breathing reality of your workplace actually matches all those lofty promises made in your corporate safety manual.
I really want to dig into that concept of organizational health, actually, because Yates defines the absolute core purpose of an audit quite clearly in Chapter 37. He says it is to determine whether the goals and objectives of a health and safety program are actually on track to being met.
Yes.
And to do that, you evaluate what the text calls the elements of an effective health and safety program. He lists 5 of them, which we often refer to as the big 5 pillars.
Heavy hitters.
Exactly. First, management commitment. Second, employee involvement. Third, worksite analysis. Fourth, hazard prevention and control. And fifth, health and safety training. But as an auditor, or even just a safety manager, how do you even begin to approach measuring these massive, sometimes nebulous concepts?
Well, those 5 pillars represent the load-bearing walls of any safety management system. To truly understand how we measure them, we have to look back at W. Edwards Deming's PDCA model.
Plan, do, check, act.
Exactly. Plan, do, check, act. This is such a critical concept in program management for you to know for the exam.
Yeah.
When a company writes a safety policy, or say they draft a new lockout procedure, that is the plan phase.
Okay.
When they roll it out and actually implement it on the factory floor, that is the do phase. The audit serves as the crucial check phase. It answers a very simple but terrifying question.
Which is?
We wrote the policy, we trained the people, but is it actually working in the real world?
I see the theory there, definitely. But let's talk about practice for a second. If I am a safety manager at a manufacturing plant that runs 24/7, and we are, say, heavily behind on our production quotas, does an auditor really expect me to pause the do phase just to check my paperwork? How does that actually play out in the real world without completely crippling the operation?
I mean, that tension right there between production and safety is the central drama of the profession.
Yeah, it's a constant battle.
But skipping the check phase is a fatal flaw. Think about it this way. Without the check, you cannot proceed to the final phase, the act phase.
And the act phase is where you standardize the solutions.
Exactly, or correct your deficiencies. You end up in this perpetual cycle of planning and doing with absolutely no feedback loop. If you never pause to measure the efficacy of your controls, you are operating blindly.
That connects perfectly to a quote from Chapter 36 that Yates actually uses to set the stage for this entire discussion on auditing in Chapter 37. It's a quote from management consultant Peter Drucker.
Oh, I know the one.
You can't manage what you can't measure.
Classic.
Right. I like to think of a safety program as a ship's navigation system. You have a destination in mind, 0 accidents, total regulatory compliance, a healthy workforce that literally goes home the exact same way they arrived.
The ultimate goal.
Right. And the audit is essentially checking the GPS to ensure you haven't drifted off course. If you don't check the GPS because you are too busy shoveling coal into the engine, you might feel like you're making great time.
But you could be steering directly toward a reef.
Exactly.
That analogy really hits the nail on the head. And the BCSP blueprint heavily emphasizes this need for measurement. Under Domain 2, candidates are explicitly expected to know how to compare performance against established benchmarks.
Which is essentially the definition of gap analysis.
Right. You are also expected to evaluate leading and lagging indicators. An audit is the engine that generates the raw data you need to perform that gap analysis.
Let's clarify those indicators for the listener just to make sure we are all on the exact same page. When we talk about a lagging indicator, we're talking about something like the TRIR, right? The total recordable incident rate.
Correct. The total recordable incident rate, the TRIR, is your classic lagging indicator. It tells you how many people have already been hurt.
It's historical data.
Exactly. It calculates the number of recordable incidents per 100 full-time workers over a given year. It is strictly a rear-view mirror metric. By the time your TRIR spikes, the damage is already done. The workers are injured, the workers' compensation claims are filed, the morale on the floor is damaged.
So the audit is designed to give us the leading indicators.
Yes, the audit provides the proactive measurements of your system's health. It tells you that a machine guard is missing, or a specific training module was skipped, or maybe a lockout procedure is being completely misunderstood by the night shift. And it tells you this before the lagging indicator forces you to react.
It shifts the entire organization from a reactive posture to a proactive posture.
Which is exactly where you want to be.
Moving from reactive to proactive sounds ideal. But the next logical hurdle for you as a listener, and really for anyone stepping into a facility to do this, is how we actually gather this proactive data. Chapter 37 outlines a very specific three-pronged methodology for conducting these audits.
Yes, the triad.
Right, you don't just walk around with a clipboard staring at things. The three prongs are documentation software, employee interviews, and site conditions. And I was looking at this triad and wondering, why do we need all three? Can't a really thorough, meticulous site inspection tell me everything I need to know?
Relying on just one or two of those prongs is incredibly dangerous, and it is a trap that a lot of novice auditors fall into. Let's break down the psychology and the reality of why we need the complete triad. The first prong, documentation. This could be physical binders or some sophisticated EHS software. It tells you what should be happening.
The ideal state.
Right. It is the idealized, sanitized version of your safety culture. You look at the written hazard communication program, the signed training logs, the safe operating procedures. Everything might look perfect on paper. The grammar is flawless, the formatting is beautiful, and every single signature is right there in place.
But if you stop there...
If you stop there, you have manufactured a dangerous, false sense of security.
The paperwork is compliant, but the paper doesn't bleed.
Wow. That is a stark way to put it, but it is entirely accurate. So that brings in the second prong, which is site conditions. This tells you what is happening at this exact second in the physical environment. You leave the office, you walk the floor, and you use your senses. You are looking at the machine guards, the walking surfaces, the ventilation systems, the chemical storage areas.
But even if the site condition looks good, or honestly, even if it looks terrible, the visual observation alone still doesn't tell you the whole story, does it?
It really doesn't. And that brings us to the third and arguably the most vital prong, employee interviews. The text specifically emphasizes that interviews are extremely useful in determining the quality of health and safety training. But they go far beyond just checking training retention. Interviews tell you why things are happening.
They give you the context.
Exactly. They reveal the psychology, the unspoken pressures from management, the friction between the day and night shifts, and the actual retained knowledge of the workforce. The physical site condition shows you the symptom. The interview reveals the disease.
I think we need a scenario to really cement this concept for the exam prep. Let's say, imagine you're an auditor walking the floor of a large bottling plant. You come across a massive high-speed conveyor system, and you immediately notice it is missing a physical guard over a rapidly rotating sprocket. That is your site condition observation. A clear, immediate hazard exists.
Right. So as a systematic auditor, you pull up the first prong, the documentation. You check the digital management system. The company has a pristine, beautifully written policy regarding machine guarding. It perfectly references the correct OSHA, or regulatory standards. The maintenance logs show the guard was inspected just a month ago. The training logs show that the operator signed off on machine guard awareness training just 6 months ago.
So the documentation is essentially flawless.
Flawless. But the site condition is failing. We have a major contradiction. Why?
This is where the employee interview becomes the absolute linchpin. You walk up to the operator and ask a simple, open-ended question about the missing guard. The operator looks around, maybe lowers their voice a bit and says, "Oh yeah, maintenance took that off 3 weeks ago. The new bottle caps keep jamming in the sprocket, and clearing the jam with the guard on takes 10 minutes.
And time is money.
Exactly. They tell you it was slowing down the line by 20%. The shift supervisor said we absolutely have to hit our quota this month because corporate is breathing down his neck, so he told maintenance to just leave the guard off until the run is done.
Boom. The root cause is instantly revealed.
It wasn't the operator's fault at all.
And this raises a profound question for you as an ASP or CSP candidate, analyzing a scenario exactly like this. What is the actual failure here?
It's not the machine.
No. It is not a mechanical failure of the guard. The guard works fine when it is actually installed. It is not a lack of a written policy, because the policy is sitting right there in the binder. It is a fundamental failure of management commitment.
The first of the big 5 pillars.
Right. It is a direct conflict between production goals and safety protocols. Without that interview, you might just write a corrective action that says, reinstall the guard.
And the moment you leave the facility, they take it right back off.
Exactly, because you treated the symptom, not the root cause. With the interview data, you realize you don't need to talk to maintenance about bolting it back on. You need to address the supervisory pressure, the quota system, and the incentive structures that actively reward bypassing safety controls.
That story leads us perfectly into the first and honestly the hardest of the big 5 elements to audit: management commitment. I was reading Yates's breakdown, and he instructs auditors to evaluate leadership by checking for visible top management leadership, assignment of responsibility, and adequate authority and resources. But how do you audit something as vague as commitment? How do you audit a vibe or an attitude from the executive suite?
Auditing management commitment requires you to look past the corporate rhetoric and really examine perception and power. You aren't just looking for the CEO's signature on a beautifully framed safety policy statement in the lobby.
Right, everyone has that.
Every single company has that. You are looking at how that policy translates into daily reality on the floor. The source text provides some incredibly sharp interview questions to uncover this. For example, the auditor is instructed to ask hourly employees this question: do hourly employees perceive that managers and supervisors follow safety and health rules and work practices like wearing appropriate PPE?
That is such a revealing angle. If the rule is that safety glasses and steel-toed boots are mandatory on the production floor, and the plant manager walks through in loafers and no glasses because they are just passing through.
Or giving a tour to investors.
Yes, giving a tour. That single action tells the hourly worker everything they need to know about the company's true values.
The double standard destroys the culture instantly. The workforce watches leadership intently. If safety is portrayed as a strict condition of employment for the hourly worker, but merely a polite suggestion for the salaried manager, the system loses all credibility. But the text provides an even more crucial interview question to assess the adequate authority and resources aspect of management commitment. It directs the auditor to ask, do safety staff members or any other personnel whose responsibilities for ensuring the safe operation of production equipment have the authority to shut down that equipment or to order maintenance or parts?
Stop work authority. That is the ultimate test of power, isn't it?
It is the defining metric of commitment. If an employee tells an auditor, I noticed a terrible grinding sound coming from the hydraulic press, and it's leaking fluid, but I'm not allowed to stop production without the vice president's personal approval.
Which you'll never get at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday.
Exactly. Or they say, I put in a work order for a new pressure valve, but purchasing denied it because of budget cuts. That is a glaring failure regarding adequate resources. It shows a complete disconnect between the written safety policy and the financial reality governing the operation.
If we connect this back to the CSP blueprint, specifically Domain 2 again, candidates are required to understand budgeting, finance, and economic analysis techniques. I think sometimes safety professionals forget that we are also business professionals.
We have to be.
As an auditor, you have to recognize that management commitment isn't proven by town hall speeches. It is proven by the ledger. Are they actually funding the safety initiatives? Are they delegating the power to stop the line to the people who are actually facing the physical risks? If the answer is no, the first pillar of your safety program is completely crumbling.
That is a critical takeaway for the listener right there. When you encounter a scenario question on the exam regarding management commitment, look past the superficial answers. Look for the answer that involves visible actions, tangible resource allocation, and the real actual empowerment of employees.
Okay, so once we've assessed the leadership, the budget, and the commitment at the top, the audit moves down into the physical reality of the environment. We move from auditing the power structure to auditing the facility itself, which brings us to the next element of the Big Five: worksite analysis.
Worksite analysis is a massive ongoing undertaking. According to Chapter 37, it requires comprehensive baseline surveys when a facility opens, a robust system for periodic updates, strict change analysis protocols, and specific hazard analyses for individual tasks.
It's heavily layered.
Yes. And if you look at Domain 3 of the CSP Blueprint, which covers risk management, you are expected to know how to apply strategies like job hazard analysis or JHA. You need to understand process hazard analysis.
Let's pause and define a few of those for the listener who might be juggling a dozen different acronyms right now. A job hazard analysis, a JHA, is where we break down a specific task step by step, identify the hazards at each step, and determine the controls, correct?
That's right. It is a very granular look at a single job, say, changing the blade on an industrial saw. But the worksite analysis also demands broader system safety analysis techniques. Things like fault tree analysis or what-if analysis.
Which are geared towards the big picture.
Exactly. These are particularly vital in industries with the potential for catastrophic, cascading accidents like chemical manufacturing or oil and gas. A fault tree analysis works top-down. You assume a catastrophic failure, like a reactor explosion, and you map out every possible combination of equipment failures and human errors that could logically lead to that specific event.
So the auditor is digging into the files to see if the organization is actually doing these things. Are they conducting a fresh JHA when they introduce a new piece of machinery? Are they doing a rigorous change analysis when they switch from a mild cleaning agent to a highly toxic chemical solvent?
Yes, checking the methodology.
But I noticed the text puts a really heavy emphasis on catching what I like to call escaped hazards. These are the risks that somehow slip through the cracks of your standard baseline surveys and daily walkthroughs.
Oh, the escaped hazards. Those are the ones that keep safety managers awake at night.
Right. So how do we catch them? The text outlines 3 main avenues: employee reports of hazards, accident and incident investigations, and trend analysis. And what's compelling here is a profound key point to remember situated right at the end of Chapter 37.
The one about inspectors.
Yes. The author states, if serious hazards are not being found during inspections but accidents keep occurring, there may be a need to train inspectors to look for different hazards.
That is incredibly practical advice. It sounds almost painfully obvious when you hear it out loud, but it's so easy to fall into the trap of the routine. If your monthly safety checklist comes back saying everything is 100% compliant, but the on-site clinic is treating 3 recordable lacerations and a sprained back every single month.
Your checklist is fundamentally broken.
Or your inspector has become completely blind to the actual risks on the floor. It indicates a systemic blind spot in the organization.
It means you are measuring the wrong things.
Exactly. It means your evaluation of hazards, which, by the way, is a core competency tested heavily in Domain 6, occupational health and applied science, is completely flawed. You might be staring intently at the fire extinguishers to make sure the tags are signed, while completely ignoring the ergonomic nightmare of how workers are lifting heavy materials right behind you.
Which is why relying on inspectors alone isn't enough, and why having multiple, robust avenues for employee reports is so vital. The source text mentions several specific avenues for reporting hazards: utilizing the supervisor chain of command, leveraging safety and health committee members, setting up dedicated voicemail boxes, and even using the old-fashioned physical suggestion boxes.
It's all about access.
Right. I was thinking about the human psychology that plays into this. You have to cater to different personalities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Human psychology is a major variable in worksite analysis. Some employees are highly vocal, highly confident, and they have zero issue walking right up to the plant manager to point out a hazard. They will use the chain of command every time.
They'll just speak up.
Right. But other workers are naturally introverted. Or perhaps they are brand new to the job, or they have a strained relationship with their immediate supervisor, or they fear retaliation if they complain about a process that makes the company a lot of money. Those workers need anonymity. They need the suggestion box or the blind voicemail.
If you only have one rigid way to report a hazard, let's say you mandate that everything absolutely must be reported face-to-face to a direct supervisor, you are going to miss a massive amount of data. You are essentially silencing the introverts and the vulnerable workers.
That is a critical insight for the listener to internalize. An effective safety management system must aggressively facilitate communication. It must remove the friction from reporting.
Okay, so once you have found the hazards, whether you found them through a highly technical fault tree analysis, a routine baseline survey, or an anonymous tip scrawled on a napkin in the suggestion box, the next phase of the audit is evaluating what the organization actually did about them.
Right, the follow-through.
Which transitions us perfectly to the next pillar: evaluating hazard prevention and control, along with emergency preparation and training. This really brings us into the meat and potatoes of safety engineering.
It does. When an auditor starts looking at hazard prevention, they are invariably evaluating the classic hierarchy of controls. They are looking to see if the company prioritized engineering controls, followed by work practices, personal protective equipment, and administrative controls.
And here again, we see the absolute necessity of the 3-pronged auditing methodology we talked about. You don't just check the purchasing logs to see if the PPE exists, which is the documentation prong. You don't just look to see if it is sitting nicely on a shelf, which is the site condition prong. You have to engage the interview prong.
You have to talk to the people wearing it.
Exactly. The source material provides another highly revealing interview question for the auditor to deploy here. Do employees ever mention PPE, work procedures, or engineering controls as interfering with their ability to work safely?
That word right there. Interfering.
Yes, interfering with their ability to work safely. That is such a vital concept for an ASP or CSP candidate to grasp. We usually think of safety controls as the things that enable safe work. But what happens when the control itself becomes the hazard?
It happens all the time. Let's look at a classic example. Let's say an organization buys heavy, completely unventilated safety goggles for workers in a high humidity, high temperature environment. The goggles fog up in 2 minutes. The workers literally cannot see the hazardous, fast-moving machinery they are operating. The safety measure has become a direct hindrance to the work.
It's blinding them.
Yes, and human nature dictates the outcome of that scenario every single time. It is an immutable law of the factory floor. If a control makes the job significantly harder, slower, or physically uncomfortable, compliance will drop to zero the exact moment supervision looks away.
The worker will just push the goggles up onto their forehead so they can actually see what they're doing.
Exactly. The audit must uncover this friction. It must determine not just if a control is present, but if it is actually appropriate for the specific task and the environmental conditions.
That brings up a really good point about theory versus reality. Let's look at emergency planning and preparation. I feel like the audit test for this is incredibly simple, but it should be strictly pass or fail. The text suggests asking employees this specific interview question. When asked about any kind of likely emergency, can employees tell you exactly what they're supposed to do and where they're supposed to go?
It is the ultimate test of your emergency action plan. And under Domain 4 of the Blueprint, Emergency Management, you have to deeply understand incident response. If you stop an employee on the floor and ask, what is your specific role if the anhydrous ammonia alarm sounds right now? And you are met with a completely blank stare, your system has failed.
Hard fail.
It does not matter if you have a perfectly formatted 50-page emergency action plan sitting in a pristine, color-coded binder on the EHS director's desk. If the knowledge hasn't transferred from the binder into the minds of the people on the floor, the organization is completely unprepared for a disaster.
A blank stare during an emergency drill interview is basically the sound of a failing grade. And that ties directly into the final pillar of the Big Five, health and safety training.
Right, checking the knowledge transfer.
The audit must verify that the training isn't just a check-the-box, pencil-whipping exercise where everyone just clicks through a digital PowerPoint as fast as humanly possible to get back to work. It's about ensuring that everyone truly understands their specific responsibilities. And by everyone, Yates makes a point to emphasize employees, supervisors, and managers.
That distinction across the entire organizational chart is crucial. Often, poorly designed audits only focus downward. They only check whether the hourly worker on the line knows the hazards of the chemical they are using. But Chapter 37 explicitly directs the auditor to look upward as well.
Holding leadership accountable.
Exactly. Do the supervisors understand their responsibilities to enforce the rules without creating a toxic environment? And do the managers understand their safety and health responsibilities? Does the facility manager understand that their failure to approve the budget for repairing a localized exhaust ventilation system is a direct breach of their duty? Training evaluation must encompass the entire hierarchy.
It has to. So we've talked extensively about the theory, the purpose of the audit, the Big Five pillars, and the psychology behind the interview questions. We've established how subjective qualitative elements like management commitment and employee perception are assessed. But now I want to pivot to the math.
Ah, yes. Let's get into the numbers.
Let's look at how an audit takes all of these qualitative observations, these vibes, and turns them into hard, quantifiable data. We are going to take a deep dive into the sample checklist provided in Chapter 37.
This quantitative checklist is arguably the most vital tool in the auditor's arsenal. To go back to Drucker's quote, "You can't manage what you can't measure." A checklist with weighted scores takes the subjective observations of an auditor, the interviews, the visual inspections, the document reviews, and translates them into a numerical metric. This bridges a massive communication gap.
Because the C-suite speaks in numbers.
Exactly. The board of directors and the financial executives might not understand the engineering nuances of why a flashback preventer is necessary on a cutting torch. They don't know what that is. But they absolutely understand the difference between a score of 82% and a score of 95%. The numerical score translates safety performance into the language of business.
Let's break down the specific sample checklist from the text. I want you, the listener, to really pay attention to how the points are distributed across the 8 sections. The weighting is not arbitrary. It tells you exactly what the safety profession, and by extension, the BCSP, considers the highest risk to life and property. I'm going to list the 8 sections and their percentage weights, and then I'd love for us to explore each one in detail.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Okay. Section 1 is BBS, or behavior-based safety participation, weighted at 5%. Section 2 is hazard communication and training, weighted at 15%. Section 3 is walking and working surfaces, weighted at 10%. Section 4 is emergency and fire protection, weighted at 10%. Section 5 is tools, equipment, and machinery, weighted at 10%. Section 6 is flammable and hazardous substances, weighted at 10%. Section 7 is electrical safety, weighted heavily at 15%. And Section 8 is control of hazardous energy, which includes lockout, tagout, and confined spaces, also weighted heavily at 15%.
Okay, that is a robust list.
It is. Let's start right at the top. Section 1, behavior-based safety, is only 5%. Why so low? BBS has been a huge buzzword in the industry for years. You hear it everywhere.
It is a buzzword, but it is also highly controversial among professionals. Behavior-based safety focuses heavily on the actions of the worker. Are they lifting correctly? Are they looking before they step? While human behavior is obviously a factor, modern safety management, which aligns directly with the CSP blueprint, heavily favors engineering out the hazard over trying to endlessly police human behavior.
Right, the hierarchy of controls.
Exactly. If you rely too heavily on BBS, you risk blaming the worker for systemic design flaws. Therefore, Yates weights it at only 5%. It is a component of a good program, but it should not overshadow physical hazard control.
That makes perfect sense. It's the bottom of the hierarchy of controls, so it gets the lowest weight. Now, Section 2 is hazard communication and training, sitting at a hefty 15%. This is the old right-to-know standard dealing with chemical exposure, safety data sheets, and labeling. Why does this carry so much weight?
Because chemical hazards are incredibly insidious. If a machine lacks a guard, the hazard is obvious and immediate. You can see it. But if a worker is chronically exposed to a solvent with a slow-acting neurotoxin or a carcinogenic dust, the damage might not physically manifest for 20 years.
And by then, it's too late.
Way too late. Hazard communication is weighted at 15% because a failure here affects the long-term occupational health of the entire facility. This tests Domain 6 heavily on the exam. If the workers don't understand the safety data sheets, perhaps due to a language barrier that the training completely failed to account for, they cannot protect themselves from invisible threats.
Next on the list is Section 3, walking and working surfaces at 10%. This covers your classic slips, trips, and falls, housekeeping, wet floors, unguarded edges.
Slips, trips, and falls are consistently among the most frequent causes of workplace injuries across almost all industries.
Yes.
However, when we look at auditing, we have to look at frequency versus severity. A slip on a wet floor often results in a sprained ankle or maybe a bruised tailbone.
It hurts, and it's recordable.
Right. It is a recordable injury. It definitely impacts the TRER, and it causes pain and lost time. But it is far less frequently fatal compared to other hazards on this list. Therefore, it commands a solid 10% for its high frequency, but doesn't reach that highest 15% tier.
Section 4 is emergency and fire protection, also sitting at 10%. This covers life safety codes, egress routes, panic hardware on doors, fire extinguisher maintenance, and sprinkler systems. I imagine the historical context here is just huge.
Well, the history of safety is quite literally written in blood, particularly regarding fire protection. Tragedies like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, where egress routes were locked to keep workers at their stations, form the foundation of these codes. The auditor is checking to ensure that if a fire breaks out, the physical pathways for survival are immediately clear and the suppression systems are functional. It's a foundational 10%.
Section 5 is tools, equipment, and machinery at 10%. This gets back to our earlier machine guarding discussion, maintenance of hand tools, and ensuring equipment isn't modified in dangerous ways.
This section often uncovers what sociologists call the normalization of deviance. A tool breaks, and instead of taking it out of service and waiting for a replacement, a worker creates a makeshift fix with duct tape or zip ties because they need to finish the job right now.
Because of that production pressure we talked about?
Exactly. Over time, that makeshift dangerous fix becomes the normal way of doing things. It's just how we run the machine here. The auditor's job is to spot that deviance and score it accordingly.
Let's look closely at Section 6, flammable and hazardous substances, which is another 10%. Within this section, the auditor has a list of highly specific questions. For example, the checklist asks, are flammable liquid quantities greater than 10 gallons stored in ULFM-approved cabinets? I want to pause right here because we throw around acronyms a lot in this field.
Mm-hmm.
What does ULFM actually mean, and why is that specific certification the deal breaker for an auditor?
It is a great question, and you absolutely need to know this. UL stands for Underwriters Laboratories, and FM stands for Factory Mutual. These are independent, globally recognized safety testing and certification organizations. They physically test these storage cabinets in highly controlled fire scenarios.
They literally set them on fire.
Yes. When an auditor asks if a cabinet is UL or FM approved, they're asking if this piece of equipment has been scientifically proven to withstand an external fire long enough to prevent the flammable liquids inside from boiling, venting, and creating a massive secondary explosion.
So it's not just about keeping the chemicals tidy and organized in a yellow box. It's about buying time during a structural fire.
Precisely. 10 minutes of fire resistance could be the difference between a localized fire and leveling the entire block. And this is why it matters deeply to the business side, too. Property insurance carriers will absolutely look for UL and FM approvals. If you are storing 50 gallons of acetone in a standard, unrated metal gem locker, you are not only violating safety codes, you are very likely voiding your multi-million-dollar insurance policy.
That is a massive financial risk. Moving on to Section 7. Electrical safety, and here we jump back up to the maximum weight of 15%. This covers everything from frayed extension cords in an office to massive electrical panels, arc flash boundaries, and ground fault circuit interrupters on the floor.
Electricity is the invisible killer. It carries a 15% weight because the severity of the risk is extreme. Human beings become incredibly complacent around electricity because we use it constantly. We plug in our phones, we flip light switches a dozen times a day, we assume it's tame.
But industrial electricity is a different beast entirely.
Yes, 480 volts and above does not offer second chances. A failure in electrical safety doesn't usually result in a sprain. It results in severe third-degree burns, ventricular fibrillation, or instant death. The checklist heavily penalizes organizations that are careless with electrical hazards.
And that severity logic perfectly explains Section 8. Control of hazardous energy, which includes lockout, tagout, or LOTO, and confined spaces. This is the final 15% weight on the checklist.
Lockout tagout is the procedure that ensures a machine is completely de-energized, achieving what we call a zero energy state, before a worker reaches their hand or their body into it to perform maintenance. This means isolating not just electrical power, but pneumatic, hydraulic, and even gravitational energy.
Blocking up a heavy press so it doesn't fall.
Exactly. And confined space entry involves highly dangerous atmospheres and severely restricted egress. If a LOTO procedure is bypassed or a confined space isn't atmospherically tested for oxygen deficiency or toxic gases before entry, the outcome is frequently an amputation, asphyxiation, or a multiple fatality event where the rescuer also dies.
It's the highest stakes possible. So how does the actual math work when an auditor is using this checklist? I mean, I'm not asking you to read a complex math formula on air, but conceptually, how does the scoring actively punish these severe oversights?
Conceptually, the math is designed to ruthlessly highlight your critical failures. Let's say we are looking at a question in Section 5 about tools. The checklist asks, do cutting torches have flashback preventers installed on the downstream side? Notice how incredibly granular that is. It isn't asking a vague question like, are the torches safe? It asks a highly technical binary question. You either have the engineering control installed correctly or you do not.
Right. If the auditor physically looks at the torch and finds the preventer missing, you get a 0 for that item.
Right. And because Section 8, hazardous energy, is weighted at 15%, getting a 0 on a critical lockout-takeout question will actively tank your entire overall audit score much faster than getting a 0 on a missing wet floor sign in Section 3. The math forces the organization to prioritize the life-threatening risks. You simply cannot get an A on your audit by having perfectly clean floors if your maintenance team is bypassing electrical lockouts.
When you add up all the weighted scores from all 8 sections, you get an overall assessment score. The example in Yates's text shows a hypothetical final score of 92.34 out of 100. That number is the golden ticket for program management, isn't it?
It really is the ultimate leading indicator. It allows the EHS director to track performance over time. If your Q1 audit was an 88.5 and your Q2 audit is a 92.34, you have quantitative, objective proof that your interventions, your new training programs, your capital investments in better machine guards are actually working. You are successfully completing the PDCA cycle.
You proved the check phase worked.
Exactly. Furthermore, you can track that audit score against your lagging indicators, like your TRIR. Over time, you should see that as your audit scores rise, your injury rates fall. That direct correlation proves the return on investment of the safety program to the executive board. You are speaking their language.
So as we wrap up this massive exploration of Chapter 37, what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you stare down your ASP or CSP exam date? It means you have to bring all these granular details we just discussed back to the big picture. When you sit down in that testing center, you are not just regurgitating memorized OSHA regulations or UL fire codes. You are proving that you can think systematically about an entire organization.
You must adopt the mindset of a diagnostician. The exam is testing your ability to evaluate the complex, interconnected web of management commitment, financial resources, employee behavior, physical hazards, and organizational psychology. You are not a hall monitor writing tickets. You are an architect of organizational resilience.
I love that. An architect of organizational resilience. Let's do a quick summary of the core takeaways before we close. Auditing is a three-pronged attack. Documentation software, employee interviews, and site conditions. You must use all three to get the absolute truth. The paperwork tells you the plan, the site condition shows you the physical reality, and the interview explains the why behind it all.
And that audit evaluates the 5 major pillars of your program: management commitment, employee involvement, worksite analysis, hazard prevention and control, and health and safety training.
A truly effective audit looks for the friction. It asks the hard questions about whether safety controls are actually hindering production and whether workers genuinely possess the power to stop the line without fear of retaliation. Finally, we use quantitative, weighted checklists to turn all those subjective, nuanced observations into hard, actionable data that management can use to fund improvements.
As we close today, I want to leave you with a provocative thought regarding the future of this entire profession. As we move rapidly into an era of artificial intelligence, smart sensors, wearable technology, and continuous digital monitoring, the landscape of auditing is going to shift dramatically. Very soon, the site conditions and documentation prongs of an audit might be entirely automated in real time.
It's already starting to happen.
It is. Sensors will know the exact millisecond a machine guard is removed. Software will automatically verify a worker's training records the moment their biometric badge activates a forklift.
That is a wild but very realistic future to imagine. The data gathering becomes instant and flawless.
But it raises a profound question. When the physical and documentary data is perfectly captured by machines, will the human-to-human employee interview become the only true measure of a company's safety culture? Will the safety professional of the future spend less time inspecting machines and entirely focus their expertise on understanding the psychology, the stress, and the unwritten rules of the human beings on the factory floor?
That is a brilliant concept for you to ponder as you continue your journey towards certification and mastery of this incredible profession. We want to warmly thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Whether you are walking into the testing center to take the ASP or CSP tomorrow, or you are walking onto the factory floor to build a world-class safety culture today, we wish you the absolute best of luck. Keep learning, keep asking the hard questions, and keep measuring what matters.